عندنا الحريم جنب الكذا. لا أنا أعتقد نبي هنا عشان يصير. لا 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 صدق أنا أقول لا احنا تعبانين.
Okay. Are we all set? Yeah. Namis, can you hear us?
Yes.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome again. This very special panel A is going to be addressing the renewable energies in the GCC and the diversification of the economy. And Dr. Fatma Shamsi will be chairing and moderating the session with three distinguished panelists, Dr. Aisha Al-Serefi, Dr. Ahmed Al-Balawi, and Dr. Faris. Dr. Fatma, the floor is yours and the panel is yours.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, and I'm glad to see you again here. This session, I think this is representing some of our new generation of researchers. They are all young researchers, so I'm glad that our initiative is working and attracting a new generation of researchers. This session, as you will know, that among the core strategies recently embraced by the GCC countries, energy transition take center stage. This transition encompasses the shift toward renewable energy, strategically considering climate change, and the pursuit of carbon neutrality. Notable initiatives like the Middle East Green Initiative and the Circular Carbon Economy have been implemented to curtail emission, promote waste recycling and treatment. Additionally, initiatives related to renewable energy and green hydrogen have gained momentum. Aligned with the trajectory sustainable development and adoption of clean energy, the GCC countries are proactively exploring nuclear energy and hydrogen sources. Both the UAE and Saudi Arabia are making significant investment in nuclear energy. The UAE Baraka nuclear plant, upon completion of its 4 reactor, will supply quarter of the UAE electricity. Saudi Arabia, boasting substantial uranium reserve necessarily for nuclear power generation, is planning its first nuclear reactor collaboration with International Atomic Energy. Subsequently, conducive conditions prevailed for the production of blue and green hydrogen and their derivatives, such as ammonia. The UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar have actively promoted innovation, attracting foreign investment. These entities play a pivotal role in startups geared toward replacing gas with hydrogen, recognized as the fuel of the future. This session aims to highlight the significant stride made in adopting renewable energy across the GCC. It will underscore the pivotal role of green hydrogen in the region's future energy landscape and illuminate the proactive measure taken by these countries to prepare for the transition shift. In this session, I'm going to pose a question, and I will ask each panel. I have a very active panelist in this session. As I said, this new generation of researcher that is going to be answering the question that I'm going to pose. And I will pose the question and have everyone to answer each of the questions. My first question is, how successful have GCC countries been in encouraging adoption of renewable energies? Do you think that these countries have established specific institutional framework and regulation for renewable energy adoption, both, of course, in general and for specific technology or specific individual technology? So I will start with you, Dr. Aisha. Let me first introduce the panelists here. We have Dr. Aisha Surehi. She is a research fellow at National University of Singapore Middle East Institute and a non-resident fellow at the Middle East Council on Global Affairs and the Arab Gulf State Institute in Washington. She's previously was a researcher associated at King Abdullah Petroleum Studies and Research Center, and visiting scholar at Georgetown University Center for Contemporary Arab Studies at the Arab Gulf State Institute in Washington. She served as a research officer at London School of Economics and Political Science Middle East Center. We'll start with you, Dr. Aisha, to answer the question. You have
okay. I have how long?
3 minutes.
Okay. Okay, so thank you very much. It's really a pleasure to be with all of you.
The voice.
Okay. So it's a pleasure to be with all of you today. It's clear now. So yes, I've been a short answer to your question. The answer is yes. The Gulf countries have really made significant strides in developing the renewable energy, both solar and wind energy. I have been tracking the development of renewable energy in the Gulf region. And if we look at the statistics, the installed capacity of renewable energy has increased from something less than 100 in all the region, but now it is more than 4,000 megawatts. And to the second part of your question, what technology and what institutions, we see a big investment on the large scale renewable energy project because the Gulf region has a huge potential on the solar. So most of the investments is in the solar projects, both in large scale and as well as small scale projects. Small scales is the solar rooftop projects. And there are some developments also in the wind, but not as much as the solar, because the potential for wind is not as high. In Saudi Arabia, the southern part have high potential for wind. Oman, also the south part. There's one project in Oman on the wind as well. And in terms of institutions, I have seen also, I mean, this is also an area that I track as well. There's, growing regulations to support both large scale and small scale projects. Maybe because we have two panelists from Saudi, so I will leave it to them. But in Oman also is trying to create the incentives for solar rooftop insulation, and the government has done so in 2 phases. The first phase was, without any really incentives. So it's just encouraging the customers to install the solar rooftops on their houses, but the return is like if they sell extra energy to the grid, then they can receive those returns. The second phase targeted 1,000 houses, and for this one, the government put in place, the incentives to support the capital expenditure. So that encouraged more people to be engaged. So this is my answer.
Thank you, Dr. Aisha. Very, very thorough answer to this question. Okay, now I'll move to our second panelist, Faris Suleiman, is a research fellow at the King Faisal Center for Research and Islamic Studies in Riyadh, a PhD candidate at the London School of Economics, and a non-resident scholar at the Middle East Institute in Washington, D.C. His research focused on the political economies and energy transition of the Arab Gulf state, and has published widely on this topic for academic and policy audience. Please, Faris.
Thank you, Dr. Fatima. Assalamu alaikum jami'an. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. So me and Dr. Aisha work a lot on similar things. So I have a similar take on the progress of the Gulf states in renewable energy, but maybe I'm a bit more cynical, skeptical. I think there's a mixed story across the GCC. So we see definitive progress in the UAE and Saudi to a lesser extent, and a little bit Oman, and less so in the other three Gulf states. And I think it's a story, also a mixed story between utility scale development and distributed development. So maybe I'll talk briefly about that and talk about a model that's emerging first in the UAE and then in Saudi. And this model is really about state capitalist development, about the sovereign wealth funds and state-owned companies underneath the sovereign wealth funds taking the lead. So although it's true that thousands of megawatts have been installed in the last 2 or 3 years, if you look at renewable energy capacity as a share of total generation capacity, it's about 14, 15% in the UAE. In Saudi, it's still about 3 or 4%, and it's below 3% for the rest of the Gulf states. So there's still a long way to go. Jordan, comparatively, also a sunny monarchy close by, is about 43% for reference. Obviously, Dr. Fatma mentioned that the UAE has 25% capacity, which it added last year from the Baraka nuclear power plant. So it has made substantial progress on the nuclear portfolio. But as a whole, we're kind of between the 3 to 10% range. And in Saudi, as an example, we have a goal to get to 50% by 2030. So there's still quite a lot to go. What we do see is that in the case of the UAE, we have Masdar, which is a company under Taqa and Mubadala, taking the lead. Nearly all the projects that have been completed at the utility scale have been completed by Masdar as the #1 player, and the #2 player is Aqua Power, which is a state-owned company from Saudi. In Saudi, it's the opposite story. Aqua is the #1 developer, and Masdar is the second. So this is very much a state-driven game, and this has been a formula that has worked generally for the UAE and Saudi. In the other Gulf states, we see that the renewable energy mandate was given to the national oil company, and there you see more disappointing results, actually. So where we tend to see independent renewable energy developers, state-owned companies, we seem to see a faster pace of transition, and also more interesting industrial policy, which, if you're interested, tomorrow I'll be presenting a paper and talking about that. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Faris. May I move to Ahmed? Ahmed Bluey is a research lead in the Utilities and Renewable Program at KAPSARC. He's an electrical engineer and holds a degree in renewable energy from Loughborough University. Prior to joining KAPSARC, he worked as R&D engineer at the electricity company for over 5 years, taking research on renewable energy. Dr. Ahmed, you can take on this question, please.
Thank you very much. Let me check the voice clear. Okay, great. So yeah, let me build on what Faris said. As he highlighted that there is a difference between the utility investments and the private sector distributed renewable energy, and this is because the success so far has been regulated, and maybe that's why it has come quite late. Some might argue. So we remember Saudi first put its ambitions for renewable energy back in 2012. At the time, it was announced by King Abdullah City for atomic and renewable energy, but it did not begin execution until maybe 4 or 5 years later, and there has been some changes to the regulations and stakeholders and the whole electricity sector. But overall, I think currently nearly all the GCC countries have targets for energy mix by 2030, from as low as 15%. I think it's Bahrain or Kuwait has 15% target, as high as 50% for Saudi to integrate renewables into the energy mix. So this is a clear indication of where the country is going, and this is important to give a signal to the private sector and to investors about the ambitions of these countries. Secondly, there is the element of the regulations and making it encouraging for investors to come. And now, recently, I think, again, all the GCC countries have made some reforms to their electricity markets, and now they have a model for an independent power purchase entities, and they also have standard requirements for renewal entrance into the market. So this encourages investors, and at least in Saudi, my answer is biased toward Saudi because that's where I'm active. The tenders are power purchase agreements for 20 or 25 years. This gives confidence. It's not a direct financial incentive, but it gives confidence for the developers that they will get returns for 20 or 25 years. And that's partially the reason why we see record bids for renewable energy, for both solar and wind. We see record bids in Saudi and in UAE as well.
Okay, I think all GCC countries are targeting this or moving in the same direction in terms of the transition. Do you think it is for the better of this country to coordinate and collaborate in this investment, so can work together? Because now what we have seen that there are discrepancy between one country is moving ahead and others still in the back. Do you think if they are coordinate their efforts, there will be better arrangement that will happen, or you can't see this coming from brilliant? Yes, Asha?
So the Gulf countries are really different in the size of the economy. They are also different in the endowment of the natural resources they have in terms of renewable energy. They are also different in the size of the financial resources. So this is why we see the energy transition is happening at different speeds in different Gulf countries. However, the energy transition is going for the Gulf countries. We will see a mix of both competition and also, I think, cooperation. Competition because the energy transition is pushing the countries to build a new competitive advantage. The Gulf countries have been, benefited from the competitive advantage brought by the hydrocarbon sector for a long time. But now with the energy transition, everyone is trying to figure out also how to do it and how to achieve the target they want to achieve. And this way, it will create kind of competition between the countries to build a new competitive advantage. And this could happen, through investing on the exported renewable energy, like the hydrogen. At the same time, also we will see cooperation, and I think it's already happening. The cooperation, maybe not, it is happening at the investment level. We see, for example, Aqua Power and Masdar are leading clean energy transition in the region at the national level, at the regional level, but globally as well. Aqua Power and Masdar, for example, are already investing in some renewable energy projects in Oman. And as I heard this also from the conversation during lunch, Aqua Power is also investing in the UAE or the other way around. So it's happening. And I also, to learn more about the subject also, we are finalizing a volume where we invited 9 authors to write about regional environmental cooperation in the Gulf. One of the chapters, we have 9 chapters there. One of the chapters is focusing on the angle of energy transition cooperation that can be brought to the Gulf countries. So there are, so as I mentioned in the beginning, Gulf countries are different in the size of the economy. So there are opportunities really for the cash flow between countries. And as I mentioned, it happens through the co-investments. But then also there is the GCC interconnection grid. Now the focus is to expand this grid, but also the Gulf countries, can produce different amounts of renewable energy, and then that creates an opportunity for trade between the countries. But because the Gulf countries are on the same, zone, so they produce the energy, for example, in the daytime for the solar energy, and then at the nighttime we don't have the solar anymore. So the opportunity to exchange could not, the market for the trade is not going to be huge because everyone is producing at the same time. But where the opportunity, lie is through the interconnection between the Gulf and the other countries who, need the energy when the Gulf produce the energy, but these countries can use it when they don't have the energy. So between the Gulf, Egypt, a little bit also east and west. So it's already happening. Saudi Arabia is connecting with Iraq, for example, with Egypt. So yeah, I hope I answered your question.
Great, thank you, Aisha. Ahmed, how do you see the cooperation or competition between the GCC country in this regard?
Yeah, just to build on Aisha's last point, now we have also the announcements of the India, Gulf, Europe connection for power that can create opportunities. Because currently, as mentioned by Aisha, there is the Gulf grid interconnection, but it's not utilized for financial gains. It's because of the similar generation and consumption profiles. For me, I think the competition will be in the industrial side, in the supply chain value creation side. But in terms of policy and regulations, there are opportunities for more collaboration, especially in the knowledge sharing area. I think it's very important because as we already mentioned that we have similar natural resources. There are pilot projects here and there, and I think the lessons learned from the different pilot projects can be utilized, and also from the sector reforms, from the incentives, from the projects. So I think knowledge sharing will be important, especially for regulators. Currently, we have the GCCIA for a grid connection, and maybe some technical information are shared through the GCCIA. But I think in terms of regulation, there is more opportunities for dialogue and for collaboration. But in the industry side, I think there will continue to be a healthy competition. Each company will try to develop its own expertise, project skills, supply chain, to be able to satisfy the demand in its own country and also within the GCC, because from all what we see. First, the demand will be high for renewable energy technologies, and secondly, the GCC countries are targeting, let's say, similar technologies. Multiple countries announced ambitions for green hydrogen production and exports. Oman, Saudi. So it's, so it's, they are targeting similar technologies. So there can be, let's say, complementaries between the different countries.
Thank you. Faris, do you have any addition to this, or do you want to talk about how GCC can leverage technological advancement and innovation in the renewable energies sector?
Yeah, sure. I'll just say briefly, maybe to tie in a few of the points that Aisha and Ahmed gave. Basically, if you look at kind of cooperation, the GCC and the energy and the renewable energy landscape, you see a different story for the movement of capital, a different story for kind of knowledge sharing, and a different story again for industrial policy. So the first one is there's a lot of cross-country investment. Aqua and Masdar, Aqua is one of the biggest investors in the renewable energy sector. Actually, is the second biggest after Masdar in the UAE, and Masdar is the second biggest in Saudi. So even though there's an atmosphere of economic competition, these SOEs are the biggest investors in each other's countries. Kuwait is a big investor in the renewable energy sector and hydrogen sector of Oman. Aqua is also a big renewable energy investor in Oman. So we do have cross-country investment, and this is a largely good story. What we have less of is knowledge sharing. The way that, for example, distributed solar works in each country is very different. We have a net metering arrangement in the UAE, net billing arrangement in Saudi, and we haven't really learned from each other's lessons. The UAE has made some advancements, but we have examples in Jordan and other countries where these advancements are more substantial, and we could learn more from them. Then I think I would agree at the end with Ahmed's point. Basically, on the industrial policy side, it seems like there's very little coordination. Saudi is building a green industrial policy based on developing companies across the supply chain in EV, in green hydrogen, and in renewables components, so in solar components in particular. The UAE is doing it also in a competitive way. And there are ways in which we can kind of building on the kind of GCC idea of a common market and a customs union, that we do this in a much more integrated fashion in a similar way to the way the EU is doing it, and have some specialization within the GCC for different parts of the supply chain. So there could be more integration, I think, in industrial policy, but maybe this will come. On the question of technology, and this is actually linked in some way, basically, before the Gulf states began their energy transition, which happened practically in the UAE began 5 years ago, in Saudi the last 2-3 years, there was an earlier kind of attempt to get involved in the global energy transition, mostly through investments. So there's two examples that come to mind. PDO in Oman invested in one of the biggest concentrated solar power manufacturers in the US. It was called Glasspoint at the time. And Aramco invested in Solar Frontier, which at that time was the biggest thin film module producer in Asia. It was a Japanese. Both of these companies went bust. And so there were kind of early scarring experiences with investment in renewable energy components. And I think in some ways, the Gulf states have learned that mistake. And now in this kind of second wave of technology with CCUS, with green hydrogen, and with storage, the Gulf states are earlier movers in this kind of new wave of technology. And I think they've learned from that earlier example. And in Saudi, there's about, I think we heard earlier about Lucid and EV, but there's about 6 or 7 of these investments that the PIF has made, along with JV partners. Longi is the biggest solar module manufacturer in the world, is opening an assembly plant in the West Coast. The Neom hydrogen plant is something we've spoken about. And then you have Hyundai, Foxconn, all opening EV plants on the West Coast. So there's a few examples that seem to show that the Gulf states are learning and adapting quite well, particularly in the UAE and Saudi.
Thank you, Faris. This is a very excellent response. Okay, let me again come back to the leveraging technological and innovation. Do you think that this GCC country has this will contribute to the job creation and economic diversification of the whole country?
This is a very good question, since the focus of the conference is on the economic diversification amid the global energy transition. From my point of view, I think, so listening to the discussion this morning, I felt like we focus more on, looking at the global energy transition as a threat or maybe as a risk. But we shouldn't also overlook the opportunities that the energy transition can bring. So actually what the energy transition is bringing is something that pretty much align with the economic diversification ambitions, including, for example, the attraction of the private sector, transitioning to the knowledge-based economy, and also the creation of jobs. So in terms of technological advancement and innovation, well, building on what Faris mentioned, yes, renewable energy in the Gulf, most of the technology that we import, so we depend on the importation of the technology, it needs to be adapted to the really unique environment in the Gulf. And for that specific reason, so we can, if we want to speed up the energy transition, we should really learn how to create the technology in-house. So the focus should really be on the human development, and then supporting the young researchers to be innovative in terms of contributing to the technology development. And this movement is already happening in the Gulf. I wrote a piece on the innovation research in the Gulf. It sounds that all the Gulf countries are developing strategies to encourage the in-house and the localization of the technologies. There are regulations and strategies across the Gulf countries. And I think this is really important for both, not only the energy transition, but also for the economic diversification. Myself, I have spent some time to learn about some of the success stories of economic diversification in different countries. And one main thing that the countries where they succeeded in the economic diversification, they focused in the education, and they focused on the research, development, and the innovation. Examples include, for example, Singapore. Singapore doesn't have the resources that it does today. They started almost from scratch, from low wages manufacturing industries. But in the early stages of development of Singapore, they focused really on educating people, training the people, skilling, reskilling. So they would attract the foreign direct investments to the country, and then they will also attract the big companies to come and invest in the country, but they will put an obligation for them to train the nationals. And then also now they have one of the strongest education sectors as well. So they focused also in encouraging people to be really more of creative and focused also on the human productivity in the sector. So that is really a big area that we should really focus on. It both feeds in the goals of the energy transition as well as the economic diversification. Also, the other thing, also looking at the different cases of the economic diversification in different countries, is I looked at Indonesia, for example, Chile, and the others. So what they do, these are resource-rich countries as well. And they have taken a mix of approaches, vertical and horizontal economic diversification. Vertical is where they enhance the value added in the resource in the commodity sector, be it oil and gas or agriculture or mineral sector, and then they develop the mid and the downstream to create other sources of revenue. But for Indonesia, for example, which is an oil and gas-rich country, it did the vertical diversification, but also because of the fall in the oil prices, It also focused on the horizontal diversification, which is the development of other sectors. They focused on the manufacturing sector, and then they also adopted a policy of transitioning from import to exports, and so they can diversify the export portfolio, and that was accompanied by many regulations, investment-friendly regulations and laws, so they can attract the investments. And then also they focused pretty much largely, as I mentioned, on the human capital and development. So yeah, so I think the opportunity that is brought by the energy transition is going to be, there will be challenges ahead, but we need to tackle those challenges because we need to prepare the generation to adapt to the new future, a generation that have the skills, the education, and the competition that they need.
Excellent point, Dr. Aisha, especially with regard to the education, preparing the new generation to handle on the issue of the transition to the new energy and to the diversification of the GCC country. Ahmed, do you have something to add here?
Yeah, allow me to add something on the innovation and technology aspect. And I'll take concentrated solar power as an example. So Faris mentioned an example of an investment in this technology that went past. And when people talk about solar, okay, it's obvious solar PV and concentrated solar power, which is CSP, as obvious candidates, especially say in Saudi Arabia, because CSP requires direct normal radiance. We have the sun shining most of the time. We don't have clouds, lots of clouds. So it seems logical that we can pursue this technology, but we did not, and a lot of other countries did not. And one of the reasons for this is that it is difficult to scale up clean technologies in the same manner. So for solar PV, it's quite simple. It is just a panel, and there are no moving parts. So when you incentivize it by giving feed-in tariffs, people will adapt it, and then economies of scale will drive the price down, and the adoption will increase. But when other countries try to do this, with, as I said, let's take CSP as a case study. So Spain provided incentives for CSP, and a lot of developers came and developed projects, and there were, I believe, over 20 projects or something for this technology. But as soon as the incentives stopped, the deployment stopped. And that's because CSP is complex. It's a large system. It has many different components sourced from different manufacturers. And the economies of scale will not apply to all components. And this also adds to the complexity, because when a small startup or a company innovates in one part of the system, if it's not compatible with other parts of the system, then it will not be easily adapted or integrated. And this makes it very complicated to incentivize it the same way as solar PV. And that's why still until now, we see PV and wind all over. This can change, however, if we see the example of China. China recently, in the past 10 years, has been leading in CSP deployment. This was triggered firstly by putting specific targets, incentives for the technology. So saying, if you develop CSP, we'll give you this much incentive. So this started the development, at least for them. And of course, China has the advantage of their large country size and well-developed supply chain. So they can more easily do that. But then in their latest 5-year energy plan, they adopted a technology agnostic approach, saying, okay, if you develop solar PV or wind, because they are intermittent, you must have 10% storage component with it. And they did not define what technology that is. So some developer, because they already developed themselves in the CSP, they chose to use CSP as that component. So they are building 1 gigawatt PV plus 100 megawatt CSP. And this led to the continuation of CSP adoption, and it will lead to continuous improvement in this technology. And for that reason, we see Chinese companies active even now in Dubai. They are implementing CSP 700 megawatt CSP projects, largely with the Chinese companies. And I think sometimes the regulators need to adapt different way to incentivize different technologies. This was just a case study of CSP, but I'll end with just an example. Saudi Arabia recently mandated that the gas turbine combined cycle plants be equipped with CCUS in them, and it was 2 projects, so it was mandated in the tender, and this will force the different bidders to try to come up with innovative ways to include this, and this will drive innovation and hopefully the prices down of this technology.
Great, thank you. Let us move now to the GCC financial mechanism. Do you think this mechanism can accelerate the use of renewable energy transition, and does it will lead to the sustainable and diversified economy of the GCC country? The financial mechanism that apply to the GCC. Let us start with Faris.
Yeah, this is an interesting question. If you look at the spectrum of if you look at transition pathways globally, and you try and think, what are the ways in which you can move quickly in the energy transition? You have kind of more liberalized market economies that do something like a feed-in tariff. They just signal something very clear to the market. They say, we will buy power at this rate for this many megawatts of installed capacity per year. So Vietnam did this in 2019, and they went from 2% renewable energy capacity to 38% in 3 years. So they had that kind of signal to the market. In the Gulf, we've taken a much more statist approach. So taking Saudi or the UAE as an example, we do have public tenders. They do have very low PPAs, the power purchasing agreement prices that are reached, but it's mostly state capital, right? These are state-owned companies like Aqua, like Masdar, that are developing these renewables. And when it's not that, in the case of Saudi, 70% of the target is not even part of these competitive tender process. It's developed directly by the PIF and Aqua Power. So we have a very state-driven process. And this is good for one thing, which is speed. You can move quickly, and hopefully that will mean that we can achieve the targets that we've set in the next few years. But it's less good for other things like labor intensity, for spillover effects, for building an ecosystem. For that, you need to develop a much more kind of broad regulatory capacity. And I think there's kind of a medium step between that, which Saudi now has engaged in. Dr. Majid indicated a little bit the increasing role of in Saudi, the National Development Fund, which is a kind of fund of funds that encompasses a number of other funds like the Saudi Industrial Development Fund. And these are kind of debt-driven approaches where both the private sector and state-owned companies can access very cheap debt to participate in these tenders. So this is kind of a step between. At the moment, it's mostly state capital. Maybe as a medium term, you'll see these debt facilities being mobilized and utilized by private sector players to participate and play a larger role, also in the distributed scale. And then hopefully in the medium to long term, you have private capital, FDI, playing a larger part. That's the idea.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I think for utility scale, as mentioned, the PPA provides some sort of a financial guarantee that you will recover your expenses. But I think there is more work to do to encourage the distributed generation, distributed solutions. This is mostly, I think, tied to the regulations. So the market cannot move before the regulators are there. The regulations are there in place. For example, in Saudi, there is a regulation now for rooftop PV, but it's the tariff is not encouraging for people to install it. They will not gain financially from it, so you will only install it if you intend to use it for your own consumption, and maybe that's still maybe not economically viable for most people, depending on their situation. But yeah, I think for me, I think there is more work need to be done for distributed generation or smaller scale development. In terms of utility scale, I think we are moving now. We are seeing large projects being announced and a lot of projects in the pipeline. So it seems to be moving forward.
I will not focus on the granular technical part of it, but maybe the macro level of the finance. I think, yes, when it comes to the energy transition, we need also to be innovative in, coming up with new financial resources. We need to make the transition from the public to the private. And this is pretty much, again, the target of the economic diversification. Because for the economic diversification, we want to reduce the dependence on the state budget as much as possible. So this is why we need to attract the private sector investment. In the Gulf, I think one country that have already practiced looking at alternative sources of finance for its clean energy projects is Oman, because Oman, the size of the economy or the size of the state budget is not pretty much supportive to depend on the state budget for the clean energy developments. So Oman at the moment has more than 1,000 megawatt of installed capacity of renewable energy. And how that has been achieved, it has been, if we looked at individual renewable energy projects, it has been achieved through consortiums where different developers come together and develop in a specific project. So what the government is doing is, to guarantee the offtake of the private investor. But then the private investor does own the project. This is the independent power production. And then also the government is taking also an approach for the hydrogen investments in the country. So what the government has done has identified a designated land for the hydrogen investment they the foreign or the local investors, they come and invest, and they fully own the project, but the government guarantee the offtake of the electricity produced or the energy produced. But speaking about the finance and this innovative approach and the transition itself, we also shouldn't think about it as that it's going to happen like very quickly. We will need time, to try different approaches, to do mistakes, to learn from ourselves. And for the oil-rich countries, actually, it is a global issue, not only for the Gulf countries, not only for the oil-rich countries. Different countries has unique challenges when it comes to the energy transition. Even like some of the countries which are advanced in their financial resources, they will still face unique challenges when it comes to the energy transition. So I think we should think about it as a gradual shift that should happen. And everyone is learning and figuring out how we want to do it. If we look at it from global perspective, there's also a failure in terms of the transfer of finance from the developed to developing countries. There's maybe progress, I shouldn't say a failure, but yeah, the 100 billion US dollar that's supposed to be transferred from developed to developing has been agreed on in 2009, and now we are in 2023. And then the total investment, it doesn't exceed maybe millions of US dollar. So everyone is learning on how to do it. And I think for oil producing countries, I think since the value of oil is still here, I think we should make an opportunity of it and then use the resources to, speed up the energy transition. And so when the time that we don't have these resources, then maybe we learned enough about the alternative sources.
But Dr. Ali, do you think the private sector, local private sector in the GCC country is capable and ready to take over such investment in this transition period? Or still will depend on the government?
Yeah, I mean, if we look at the statistics at the moment,
I'm talking about this private, local,
the local private
sector.
Maybe Faris knows more, but the private sector is not.
I mean, private sector in the GCC country are depending on the government.
Yes,
mostly.
Yeah.
So how do you see that in this regard? Is there a possibility that they will take over this opportunity and start investing?
I think Faris can answer this more, but I think it will go both sides. Not only the private sector that needs to be strengthened. Maybe we need to do more of skilling in the private sector. We need to have the incentives in place from the government side for the private sector participation. But yeah, I'll leave it to Faris, honestly.
Do you want to add something here?
I mean, we have some interesting examples in the National Renewable Energy Program in Saudi. You have a few smaller tenders for projects in Jeddah and Medina that were competed over by private sector consortiums. So they're projects generally under the scale of $100 million. And you have private sector groups like Al-Fanar, Desert Technologies, other kind of mid-sized Saudi companies that are competing. What has happened, though, is that the private sector has shown itself to be unwilling to compete directly against state-owned companies. So if you have a tender that's large enough to attract the attention of Masdar or Aqua Power, then it's unlikely that you will find private sector players also competing because the cost of capital for the state-owned firms is significantly less, and also their access to debt is better. So in a situation in which you have both of them overlapping, no, the private sector is not up for it. But I think in a situation in which, firstly, you have readily available debt facilities, which now the Saudi Industrial Development Fund has a program called Mutajaddida, which is a very attractive debt program for renewable energy developers, then I think you will see private sector get slightly more involved. Are they up to the task of building out the whole of the renewables kind of targets of Saudi and the UAE in the next 10 years? Probably not alone, but maybe some mixture of the two.
Okay, thank you,
Ahmed. Yeah, I'll reiterate that I think this is linked to the regulations being flexible and up to date with the market. Yeah, as Faris said, the private sector cannot compete for these large scale tenders that already have established companies and consortiums competing in them. So when I look at smaller scale, when I look at rooftop PV or EV charging, small companies, I'm talking very, very small companies that open PV components shops, mostly closed, or their business is just for farms, for wells in farms. And similarly for EV charging, even though the regulations for EV charging has been established for 2 or 3 years, we don't see many small companies. It's still large companies, maybe even Alphanar, maybe mid to large company, or ABB or PIF-owned companies that are starting these businesses and sectors, and maybe incentivizing the private sector. And even, for example, if we see energy efficiency, I don't think there are a lot of active players. Most of the projects are with the Tershid, which is a super ESCO, government super ESCO, and there are ESCO companies that are getting contracts with Tershid, but we don't see them active on their own. So I think the regulations need to be flexible and active, and allow room for innovation for small market entrants.
Okay, before we opening the floor for discussion, I have my last question related to do you think the adoption of renewable energy accelerate transition to a more sustainable other sectors like tourism, for example, other sectors in the country?
The economic diversification.
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
The adoption to the new energy will accelerate transition to a more sustainable sectors like tourism, for example.
Oh, yes. Actually, we can use the renewable energy and integrate, like the clean energy, and integrate it with the tourism sector. We can come up with creative ideas. For example, I'll go back to Singapore, for example. So we have these iconic trees, which are really run by the solar panels, but at the same time, it's a main tourism attraction icon for tourism in Singapore. I think also the UAE is doing the same through Masdar, which is the goal of it is to have a sustainable institute that practice sustainability in different aspects, including in the power generation, energy efficiency, and also it is when I visited Abu Dhabi, of course, I visited also there. So it is a way also to attract tourism, and I think it can also support the education sector. It is an opportunity also to use these as facilities to bring students to renewable energy projects, so they can see it themselves, and then they can learn from practical point of view rather than just read about it. But I think there is a lot more that we can think of in terms of how we can, build the clean energy sector, not in stand-alone sector, but integrated with the other. So I think your question is innovative in a way.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, so there's a few interesting examples of renewable energy being integrated into other kind of sector developments. The one that comes to mind immediately is 2 weeks ago, the Red Sea development on the west coast of Saudi awarded its utilities package to a consortium of Masdar and EDF. And the idea being that the entire concept of the Red Sea development is a kind of sustainable tourist destination with a dozen or more than a dozen hotels that will be net zero in some capacity. And Masdar and EDF have been tasked with both desalination and power production that will be net zero. So definitely we see the expertise that is gained in public tenders and also in large-scale giga project development being used to try and develop these new developments in a sustainable way. And then obviously in the industrial sector, we have a few different examples. In the UAE, we have We have Emirates Aluminium, which has now produced a green aluminium product using renewable energy as the main kind of energy component and marketing this globally and to European clients. And obviously, the obvious one is kind of in the hydrogen strategy of Oman, Saudi, and the UAE. All of these, we see a green hydrogen component where renewable energy will be used for the electrolyzing process. And so I think the kind of lessons that are being learned in the renewable energy transition are being already adapted and used in kind of tourism and industry are the two that come to mind.
Yeah, of course. So Dr. Magd mentioned this morning that when Saudi Vision came, probably not a lot of people were talking about the term energy transition. And probably when people started talking about energy transition, they were not talking about critical minerals. But now you cannot escape the conversation of critical minerals linked to renewable energy and EV and batteries. The projections for the demand, where are they produced and processed, and this has become a part of the long-term strategy of any country. If we have this much ambition for solar and wind and batteries, then how are we going to source the minerals required for them, especially to meet the localization quotas or to localize the manufacturing? And obviously, Saudi has an ambitious target for EV manufacturing. I believe all the projects I heard are lithium batteries, and of course, lithium has different chemistries, but we do not have lithium in Saudi. We have some copper and zinc and iron, aluminum, but so far I don't think we have any lithium reserves. So this is obviously something that is going to be sourced. And Saudi made some investments abroad and also made some investments to process lithium in the kingdom. And overall, it has an ambition to be a green processing hub for lithium and other minerals to satisfy its own need and also potentially maybe for export. So this year beyond tourism, obviously minerals is something that's now strongly linked to renewable energy transition.
Okay, thank you, guys. Now I open the floor for discussion. Any question? Dr. Laguel.
I think we should separate the generation of electricity from the act of distribution. The generation of electricity used to be a government, totally government specialization. Yeah. What can I do? Then, okay. Now it's being separated, at least in Saudi Arabia. Regardless of the source of generation, the renewable hydrocarbon or else. The issue is to open the distribution, to the grid, to open the grid. Once you open the grid for competition, then then anybody can come and produce their renewables into the system. We haven't reached this maturity yet. And this will encourage real competition, because now the competition is to enter into a negotiation with the owner of the electricity, buyer of electricity, which is one. We have to open up the system. If you open the distribution system, be it national, international, this will introduce more competition and will introduce more efficiency. We have not reached this level of maturity. This is one point I want to raise. And when will we reach this stage? The second is somebody raised the issue of interconnection between GCC and others, between GCC themselves and between GCC and others. Fortunately, the GCC connection right now is only for emergency. And it's now, luckily, starting to make money. But when you open this to more competition among producers in GCC, then we also will add more efficiency into the system. The third angle, now Saudi Arabia is opening up connection with Iraq, totally independent of the GCC grid. Is this a new trend? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Want to answer this question, Aisha?
So thank you very much.
You take another? There is another question.
Thank you. Very nice, enlightening information and about the situation that we have in the Gulf, in the GCC countries. I think when we think of diversification, the way we want to define diversification, I think we should include, in addition to having other source of revenue for the government, aside from oil, we should also include in our thinking of diversification in terms of providing employment opportunities for the people of the Gulf away from the government and the private sector. And I think the potential for renewable being a source of diversification, I don't think it will be in terms of manufacturing solar panels or photovoltaics or these things. Rather, I see it if we invest enough in creating knowledge and knowledge sharing, as Dr. Ahmed mentioned, then we can have expertise in this field. And that's really a good source of diversification of our economies. So I think it's important that we always mention this. We raise the issue of investing, and especially that our countries, the education systems is not perfect, but we have some very good institutions in the area. We have a large number of youth. Most of the GCC population is 50% is below the age of 35. So all of this, we should have this potential that we have, in addition to the natural sources of energy that we have, like solar, to benefit from it and push for the diversification.
Thank you. Last question.
Thank you very much for the debate and the quality of the debate. I'm here. Yes, I would like that you highlight also another dimension of the renewable energy and the transition, the energy transition, is linked to this energy transition is a societal shift, is a societal shift in the values, in the way of behaving of consumers, of citizens. And I would like to understand also this, what is happening from the consumer side, what is happening from the citizen side. Is it desirable? Are they engaged on this or not? Because it's a shift also in the preferences, in their preferences. What are the preferences for the electric cars? Do they want to shift to this? And this is fundamental, for example, and I would like to also to stress the link with the tourism sector. I have a PhD student addressing this particular topic. And if we look at the Europeans, there is a big shift in their preference for the tourism destination based on the footprint, the total footprint. So they do not want to have a big footprint when they go somewhere. So that means that preparing a kind of tourism where renewable energy is at the core is fundamental for them, because we have a problem with the air transportation. We cannot substitute for the moment. We have not enough alternatives in the short run. So they need to know, at least when they come, that the footprint is very small. So that means that really we need to understand what is coming from the preferences, and then you will see the speed. The speed can be pushed by the state, but based on the preferences of the consumers. Thanks.
Thank you. Victor?
Can you hear me? So the last comment, can we meet after that? I'll talk to you about demand response, which is a key element here to get the consumer habit change. Dr. Fatma, you've opened the Pandora box with two questions. I try to be independent, but I'm from the region, so I get, and the panelists, you young people, this region depends on you. I'm expecting much more. So the first question is the private sector. I'm from the private sector all my life. I worked initially in a government with Kuwait Petroleum, but I'm from the private sector for the last 30 years. Without the local private sector, there is no energy transition. Very simple. Why? And the private sector has not been allowed for a number of reasons. Private sector is comfortable currently acting as a consumer product distributor and an agent for original equipment manufacturers and government contracts. They're happy, agents, distributors. In energy, it's more complicated. The large energy companies, all state-owned enterprises, are crowding out the private sector. So they're telling the private sector, I'm giving you procurement opportunities, you bid on them, it's very confined, outsource services only. A lot of people say Aqua is a public company. It's not a public company. Yes, recently only. It has started as a private company. It is still run as a private company. I hope it would continue to go back to becoming a private company, but only temporarily now the government has a majority ownership, but it started private. So the reality is something has to change, both from the government and the risk profile of the private sector, because the private sector is comfortable. They don't want to put risk capital on the line. They don't want to learn the skills of project development. Why am I so confident? In 2004, my small company of 30 people had 7 gigawatts under management in China, South Korea, Taiwan, Abu Dhabi, where I started my whole career, and Tunis. How did I do that? 30 people. I partnered with others much bigger than me. We put consortia, we won. But it required work and putting risk capital. So This can be done. The other thing, you open another Pandora box. You ask the panel about regional cooperation. The rules for the energy transition today are being drafted outside of this region. The rules that this region will have to comply with are being drafted by others. So one of the things we need to do here is how can we go get together? Not only GCC, the energy transition includes Egypt, includes Morocco. They are as advanced as Saudi Arabia, as Oman, as the United Arab Emirates in the energy transition today. How can we all improve our bargaining position and have a seat on the table? Because we can. They all need our products, low carbon products, when they become available. We can have a seat on the table now to be part of setting the rules. Thank you for allowing me.
Thank you, Doctor. This is a very valuable point that you add. Thank you very much. Doctora.
Thank you, Dr. Fatma.
Doctora,
I have the mic.
تفضلي.
Yes. Thank you,
Doctora Nof.
Okay. Yes, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Fatma, and thank you all for the panelists for the great discussion. I have just one comment and maybe a question for further research or if there is any time. One comment regarding the role of energy transition and the private sector, also building on the previous comments. From also what we can see is that energy transition can help. In recent years, we can see that FDI and investments, even going around the world, are following any areas or sectors that are also compliant with ESG recommendations. And that's why it could be a very powerful source of attracting FDIs, which is also a main goal of many countries in the region, and of course, including the GCC countries as well, in which would help eventually in building new sectors and also building new areas in the local economy. So in this way, there is also, we can see that there is a window of energy transition helping in eventually in economic diversification or in a way or another. So the other question, or actually the question that I had in mind is looking at the recent projects also going around in GCC countries in terms of providing services in basic sectors such as water desalination. How do you see the future of energy transition and green energy in terms of water desalination in the region? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Anop. This is an excellent point, especially related to the water desalination. But as we know that, I mean, transition to green energy, this is required use of a lot of water. So this is an issue in the GCC country. There is another hand. Okay, please.
Thank you very much. I would like just to ask you a question, because I didn't hear this word, and I'm very attached to the digitalization. Do you think that we can have a successful energy transition without digitalization? I mean, how we can obtain digital services, electrification of end-use sectors, how we can integrate valuable renewable energy into our grid without implementing the digitalization. So do you think that we can obtain a successful energy transition without digitalization?
Well, I think the technological change and innovation is very important for transition to the renewable energy. And I think all GCC countries are moving towards digitalization and innovation and technological transfer. This is very important, or this is the beginning of any transition period that they are moving toward. But the issue is how to adapt to this transition, and this is this new technology. And I think as Aisha mentioned, and even Abdullah mentioned, that education is very important to prepare the new generation for the changes that require to transit from to apply this transition issue. Okay, I will. If you don't have another question, I will ask the panelists to respond to some of the comments or questions that raised by you. Please, Farasha.
Okay, so yes, thanks very much for the questions. I think the questions, all of them come under one theme, which is the challenges for the energy transition. Yeah. So the questions came that we have multifaceted challenges: market, labor, societal, and then also foreign policy kind of question, and then also the technical aspect of it. And yes, the energy transition is not going to be an easy task. We will face so many challenges. On the question on the energy, the electricity market, it is about liberalizing the electricity market. The governments across the GCC are aware of this challenge, and it's actually taking place gradually in different speeds in different countries. So I did my PhD in Oman. I looked at the renewable energy transition in Oman. So Oman, the electricity market used to be bundled, like it was fully owned by the government from generation, from transmission to the distribution. But then the government, tried to unbundle the electricity market. So we have separated the generation, the transmission, and the distribution. And then I remember when I was doing the PhD, when I asked about the liberalization of the electricity market, it was kind of a sensitive question at the time. But, with the implications of the oil price fluctuations and its impact on the state budget, the governments are fully aware that this is not a sustainable practice anymore. So for Oman, there is a gradual privatization of the electricity market. And Oman has already actually implemented spot market so that it can encourage different investors to come and, but of course that wouldn't be also easy. It will need a lot of work in terms of the regulations and in terms of the transparency. So in terms of the interconnection grid, I'll leave it back to my colleagues. But on the question on the job creation for the young people in the area of the energy transition, yes, I think the energy transition, the market will be the labor market will be a little bit, not a little bit, but it's going to be somehow pretty different than the traditional electricity market, where everyone find the public sector is more of an attractive, but the private sector is not. With the energy transition, the skills that are needed will be different. It will require entrepreneurial way of thinking. It will, require the young people to think in a way to build their own companies, like state, small, medium enterprises. And so maybe the challenge lies with the government in, also upgrading the education system from school level to the university level. So it should be applied to any kind of discipline, not only the energy. So for example, I studied biology, but at the same time, we don't study, how to think in entrepreneurial way. So in the future, we can think for ourselves, we can establish our own, market. So this should be changed in the education system. The young people should learn to do things differently. So it will be a little bit of a different market than what we see today. And then the question on the societal change. Yes, in the Gulf region at the moment, this is also an area that needs more of a research on the readiness of the people to, adopt those sustainable practices. There isn't much of research in the people preferences, but I think, the major challenge here is like we have access to the services and they are very cheap. Electricity, water, transportation as well. We are not encouraged, to ask for public transport because I can have my own car and my own car. So I think what will make, I'm taking time.
Yeah. I'll give just
Okay.
a few minutes for because we ran out of time.
Okay.
Yeah, just two comments quickly. First, just continuing on the comments on the consumer. I think the consumer have more power to influence the corporates, private sector. So we talk about countries net zero, but also there is the corporate net zero. So, for example, Saudi, Aramco, SABIC, Ma'aden, STC all announced net zero ambitions, and as they implement the different stages of this, they will influence the medium and small enterprise, and hopefully that will lead to other companies adapting net zero practices. And I think as we see more and more of that, consumers will start to prefer to deal with this company instead of this company. So I think the consumer will have more power once the corporate net zero becomes more common. And just a comment here, I would love to have a chat with you on the private sector role. I will learn a lot of you. For your second part about having our voice in the energy transition dialogue, I believe we are doing that. Last year, COP was in Sharm el-Sheikh. This year it is in Dubai. And I think the region is doing a lot of work in getting its message out there. Maybe there is more to be done, but I think we are quite active.
I'll try and be brief. And in reverse order, Dr. Abdullah asked about opening up distribution, and that's a key problem. Basically, for Saudi, we have a situation where we have a net metering regulation that came from the electricity regulator 4 years ago, and then again 2 years ago. It allows businesses and people to install PV on their rooftops, but it put the Saudi electricity company as the main arbiter of how big the project is and whether it moves forward or not. So this is obviously a very delicate conflict of interest, and the electricity company has an incentive in not decreasing its revenue for the next year by allowing clients to install PV. So this is a critical kind of problem with the institutional framework that has to change if we're going to see distributed development. The other question from Dr. Abdul and also Dr. Wael kind of also asking about private sector development. And the way I see the subject is, I think in Saudi and in the UAE, you have an understanding, I think, amongst policymakers that economic development does not mean private sector development, not necessarily. We definitely see a state capitalist development framework. These are state-owned companies that are driving progress. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Definitely there are Asian models where SOEs played the largest part in kind of development. And with the energy transition in particular, we see trade-offs. Basically, you could do an SOE-led transition. You will probably have good outcomes in terms of speed. Maybe you'll have good outcomes in terms of prices, as we see at these tenders, but maybe lower outcomes in terms of labor intensity, lower outcomes in terms of industrial policy. But these are choices that our policymakers have made, and they have kind of pros and cons between them. The last question I'll answer is on consumption, and why do we not see more movement on consumption? Like Dr. Aisha said, we don't really have a lot of data on consumer preferences in the GCC, but we do have a situation of stalled subsidy reform. So in 2014, when the oil price dropped, we saw quickly the UAE and then Saudi a few years after engage in some subsidy reform, some linking of prices to international fuel and electricity prices. But that really stopped after that. In fact, in Saudi, it was reversed last year with the introduction of the heavy consumption tariff. And in here, you see a very important clash of priorities. Basically, this new regulation from the SEC allows companies that have where energy is a very large component of their production and they're export oriented, to access a new lower tariff at 12 halala. So this is an opposite direction, signaling basically that these companies are now less attracted to solar and renewable alternatives because they can buy cheaper power from the grid. This is obviously part of an export diversification strategy, and it's going against a kind of renewable energy transition, at least at the distributed scale. So these things have to be worked out and I think ironed out. So I'll leave it at that for now.
Okay. You want to add something? Quickly, please.
So just on your point on the ASG, yes, I think we should think about it on more of an opportunity. So for example, when the CBAM was implemented, the Southeast Asian really looked at it as a threat. Only Singapore has looked at it as an opportunity, because even though Singapore is not a major greenhouse gas emitter, but it wants to be proactive when it comes to the clean energy transition, so they can attract more of businesses to the country. So as Nauf mentioned, it is a way really to attract foreign direct investment, which now has different preference.
Thank you. On your behalf, let me thank those young generation of researchers for their valuable contribution to this session and for your comments and your intervention also. Thank you very much. And please let us, thank you very much. Really, with that too.
Well done. وين البراء؟ إيه؟
Are we here?
You are here. You
No,
are
I
here.
magically need to do my.
Yes, and I magically.
Okay.
طيب اللي هم رضوان و بعتيهم. طيب مش هذا صح؟ This one you mean, Shireen? Okay, and the other one, hold on. You mean Ismail? This is who? طيب, and who else? We have these two.
Dr. Zakiris, yes. And Ismail Jin.
This is the okay. Any four presentations you mean? طيب ترسل لي هي بالايميل
او يو اس بي.
عندك يو اس بي؟
للاسف ما عنديش.
طيب ايميل. أنا حطمن عليكم لما كل واحد يكون في سريره. وبكره اطمن عليكم انه كل واحد يكون في الطياره. لا عندي حساسيه اصلا، فعندي موعد النهارده اليوم الساعه 10 بالليل ان شاء الله. Yeah, don't worry. I'm okay. You want me to write it for you or you're okay? Okay.
OG ولا ORG؟
ORG. Okay. Who will speak first? Who will speak first?
We have 4 speakers. And the moderator will decide.
Yeah, not according the agenda.
احتمال يصير تغيير بسيط عشان واحد speakers has to the online speaker needs to go soon. So I
Okay.
think we start with Ismail Radwan.
Okay.
Followed by Ismail.
Then
online. بعدين Yusuf Zafiris and then
طيب. So this this is who? This one.
This is I would say this is probably number 2.
This is the online guy.
Online guy.
So no need to open his presentation.
Almost he's going to share.
Okay, and this one who? This is the number 3.
This should be number. I'm guessing based on what we discussed.
Okay. This is number 1.
That should be.
Okay, and your number 4.
Yeah, that's the group. I'm number 4.
Oh, okay, I'm just confirming your number 4.
See, and the moderator has it.
Okay, I think it's on the way. Because all the emails has to has to pass by the cybersecurity scanning before. بس المرة هذه فاين تحصل. Received, yes.
Received. Yes.
واحنا سكرنا لا. Okay. Okay. So Ismail Radwan will be number 1. Just
I assume.
يعني ما شاء الله. Then إسماعيل الثاني يكون
إسماعيل
هذا تبعك. لأنه عادة فوق كذا. قصدك إيش بالضبط؟ إنه في ممكن different أبشر ثواني بس نسوي كذا. Your presentation looks interesting. Okay. Welcome. كل حاجة موجودة يعني. Fine.
Barat, sorry, can you try to share this presentation to make sure it's working?
Yeah, sure.
Zoom? Okay.
Sure. I will. Who will start with Ismail Radwan, right?
Yes, according to the agenda, Ismail Radwan. And then Dr. Nader, and then the Zafiris, and then the online guy.
But I think the online guy will be the second one.
No, he hasn't come yet, and on the agenda he's the fourth. So we'll just go around with the agenda, I guess.
Okay, hold on, just bear with me, please.
Sure.
Please. طيب. According to the agenda, okay, Ismail Radwan will be number one, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then
Dr. Nader Qabbani.
This one, number two. Then the online.
Zafiris, no, the Zafiris Tazanatos.
Okay, the name. Three. Then Ismail, that guy, Ismail is online.
Ismail Jeng is online, exactly.
Okay, so I'm going to delete it from my side.
Just keep it there. Don't open it, but just keep it there, just in case.
Okay, خلاص. طيب, let me share the first one. Full screen. Can you see?
Yes, I can. Can you scroll, please?
Hold on.
Because all the problems happen with the scroll. Yes, okay, that's fine. Yes, okay, good.
Okay, we'll keep this one on the, or shall we?
No, let's just keep it away until we start.
Okay, sure.
I wanted to test the other one by Dr. Nader because I've seen some scrolling. I'm not sure if the scrolling is going to work with the Zoom. That's why I was asking about this one.
Hold on. Let me share it then.
Okay.
أنا أبو زين. هلا والله. أنا خلصنا كل شيء. أنا في الأوديتوريوم. أوكي. طيب, okay. Start. Can you see the presentation, Namis?
Yes, I can see. Can you scroll, please?
Hold on.
Okay. Okay. Fine. That's good. Okay. That's working. Good. Thank you very much. Thanks.
على التراجع فيما يبدو الى العمق شرقا باتجاه الحدود، لكن حتى الان محمد لا يعرف الى اي مدى وصلت هذه الدبابات، هل تراجعت الى حد كبير ام انه تراجعت لبضعه عشرات من الامتار؟